Hello, I'm Dr. Sam, this is Dr. Sam's Health, and today we are going to talk about the masks again. You see, a month ago or so I made a video on masks and I think I was quite convincing, and a lot of people actually provided me with a very good feedback on that video. At the same time, since then I have received quite a few interesting pieces of information in various forms, memes, YouTube videos, posts, messages. People were talking about different funny things about masks, about how I was wrong about this and that, and how masks have multiple detrimental effects and they do not work at all. So today I would like to talk about the 7 things which fall into the category of either myth or truth or conundrums about these masks. And we'll do a lot of testing today. I've got a pulse oximeter here, I've got CO2 monitor, so we can try out different things and talk about these 7 items. So I promise you that this video will be very interesting and very hands-on because we've got some experiments to do, but also would like to encourage you to check out my previous video on masks because I think that I made quite a few valid points and it was very well backed up by research and scientific evidence. And there will be some research in this video today. As always, before I begin, I have to make several disclaimers. First of all, I am a practicing physician, but the opinions that I express in my videos or in my blogs, by the way, check out my website, drsamshealth.com, I've got my blog there. These opinions are solely mine, they are not to be taken as a medical advice, and they do not necessarily represent the opinions or statements of my regulatory bodies, like my college or my universities which I belong to. So please take it as an educational video at best, or just my opinion, which I'm happy to share with you here. So let's proceed with our myth. So let us begin, and let's start with a very common statement that I've heard multiple times, which is protecting yourself against the virus using a mask is pretty much the same as protecting yourself against mosquitoes using a chain link fence. I must say that it does sound like some sort of a common sense wisdom, but it isn't. The proportion or the ratio of the sizes of a mosquito and the hole in a fence is absolutely different in comparison to the size of the virus particle, virion, and the hole in the mask. Mosquitoes are literally several hundred times smaller than the hole in a chain link fence, and in addition to that, they're living beings. They have their central nervous system that allows them to navigate, to maneuver through these holes. Viruses do not have this ability. They are indeed very small particles, but they are still just several times smaller than the holes in just one layer of a mask. If you put several layers of a mask, they form a meshwork that is much more difficult to penetrate for a virus than just one layer. And in addition to that, the viruses are so small that even electrostatic forces that are associated with the cloth fibers can affect the virus. They can repel the virus just because they have the similar charges. They can attract the virus and let it kind of stick to a fiber, so that the masks have multiple ways of protecting the virus from coming in. And on top of that, viruses usually travel on droplets, which are much bigger than the virus particle, and if we use the same analogy as the mosquitoes and the fence, you can imagine mosquitoes traveling on a huge balloon that cannot penetrate the fence at all. The whole idea of universal masking is often misunderstood. The idea is not to protect individuals from inhaling the virus, but rather to protect the community by putting a barrier for exhalation of these particles or droplets that will spread at large. Now, if majority of people are wearing masks, then the viral spread will be slowed down. So the whole idea behind the universal masking can be summarized as source control rather than individual protection. Okay, the next literally meme that I've seen a lot was picture of I guess virologist or epidemiologist wearing a hazmat suit, and the caption would be, "Virologists wear these to protect themselves, and you believe that your cloth mask can protect you as well." Well, I'm not even sure how to approach it properly because I'm not sure I see the logic behind all this stuff. So yes, virologists, when they're working with patients who have highly transmittable, highly infectious and deadly diseases like Ebola, they are wearing these hazmat suits. Totally makes sense. Nobody said that masks are even close to these hazmat suits in terms of protection that they provide you with. And you cannot really believe that virologists or infectious disease control specialists are wearing these suits 24/7. So yes, these suits, they do provide people with close to 100% protection. Masks are far away from that, but you cannot wear these suits 24/7. We cannot provide people with these hazmat suits and nobody would wear them because it's simply practically impossible. So masks represent a perfect protection system that is the most cost-effective option we have. We can have a hazmat suit that is absolutely unaffordable and inaccessible for everybody, and it's impossible to wear 100% of the time, but at the same time it would provide you with 100% protection while you're wearing it. At the same time, wearing a mask protects you in case of surgical mask from like 63% of contaminants. If in case of N95 mask, it provides you with 95+% of contaminants. And you can wear it pretty much all day long, take it on and off. It's accessible, affordable. You can have them, you can wear them, we can give them to everybody. And again, universal masking has much more benefits than just protecting individuals. It protects the community. So this meme is funny, but if you think about it, it doesn't make much sense. Okay, the next one is based on research. And I cannot even do this air quotation marks because it is based on real research, but people are completely misinterpreting it. So there was a meta-analysis, and a lot of people are talking about it, that there was a meta-analysis of 6 randomized controlled trials. And they showed there is no statistically significant difference between wearing a mask and it kind of implied in these videos and not wearing a mask in terms of the viral transmission. So I know exactly what meta-analysis people are talking about. It's a meta-analysis of Lone et al. Published in 2020. I will add the link to it and you can study it by yourself if you don't trust me. But please take a look at least at the title of this meta-analysis and what they are actually comparing. They're comparing N95 masks versus surgical masks, and they showed that there is no statistically significant difference between wearing N95 and a surgical mask. So what happens here is people are taking a valid research article and completely misconstrue the conclusions of the authors. Authors never said that wearing a mask has no statistically significant effect in comparison to no mask. No, they're just saying that N95 masks are not much better than regular surgical masks, especially given that their setting is mostly medical setting, so it's like semi-sterile environment. There are multiple other things that are happening in medical settings to decrease the viral load, the amount of viral or bacterial particles floating around. It totally makes sense. This research is valid, but it's completely misconstrued. But if you want to familiarize yourself with the research that is specifically targeting the question of whether it makes sense to wear a mask or not, you can check out another meta-analysis, which was also published in 2020 by Liang et al. And it includes 21 randomized controlled trials, and they have shown that in medical settings for healthcare professionals, wearing a mask reduces the risk of transmission by 80%, and for non-healthcare professionals, like in, I guess, non-medical environments, it reduces the risk of transmission by 47%, so it halves it. I think we should actually be much more careful with the research we pick and the way people interpret it. So please pay attention. Every time you hear anything that starts with the words research says, scientists have discovered, please look into that and make sure that you educate yourself and that you read the actual information there, because often it's been grossly misrepresented. Thank you. Okay, now we are moving to the area of gases. One of the memes that I've seen was, jeans can't stop the farts, but you expect your cloth mask to stop the virus. Ha ha. Sorry, but it's not even funny. It's getting ridiculous. The same people who believe that protecting yourself against the virus using a mask is the same thing as using the fans to protect against mosquitoes, now believe that somehow the gases that we pass when we fart are somehow comparable in sizes with the virus or with the holes in like between the meshwork of the cloth. So medical doctors and science take on that. The gas that conveys the smell to our flatulence is methanethiol. The size of a molecule of this gas is 0.4 nanometers. The size of a typical viral particle is around 125 nanometers, or somewhere between 60 and 140 nanometers, which is a couple of hundred times larger than the size of the molecule of methanethiol. Do we really have to talk about this? At this point, I'm starting to think that people who are making this joke about fans should not be able to make these fart jokes. They should be allowed just to pick one, because they are contradicting themselves at this point. But since we're talking about gases, let's talk about the two most important gases in our life: oxygen and carbon dioxide. The common statement that I hear these days is that masks deprive you of oxygen. And I must say, to a certain extent it makes sense, because you got a barrier here that might prevent you from getting enough oxygen, so it has to be tested somehow. In my previous video I mentioned that I've done this test myself. I've taken the pulse oximeter and checked my oxygen saturation using this device while wearing a mask and while not wearing a mask, and there was no difference. I've seen multiple videos of people doing so, and I think it might be a little bit redundant for me to do it again, but what can I say? I'm all about science and I'm all about experimenting, so we can use this device right away. So I'm starting this oximeter, I'm putting it here on my finger. Let's give it several seconds. So my oxygen saturation is 97. I think it's a pretty good result. 98. I'll show it to you so you could see it. You might notice that my heart rate is slightly elevated. Apparently it's the trend. All doctors who are doing this, they have highly elevated heart rate, and I think it's because of the fact that we're annoyed by the stupid claims that some people do. But now it's time to put on the mask. By the way, my oxygen saturation is 98. So put it on the mask, making sure that I've got a perfect seal. It's still 98. Let's give it maybe 10, 15, 20 seconds. I have to wait a little bit. It's still 98. It clearly shows that my heart rate is going up and down slightly, so this device is working. It's analyzing my oxygen saturation. Oh, believe it or not, it's 99 now. If anything, actually I've done this test several times already, I noticed that my oxygen saturation goes slightly up, which is hilarious. Again, 98. I think we got enough proof that oxygen saturation remains the same. So I can take off my mask. I must admit I don't like them much. Okay, we have pretty much dispelled this myth, but I would like to make a side remark, which might complicate things a little bit. Actually, the reason why I'm talking so much about this is because I see several facets to this problem from the physiological standpoint. Yes, oxygen can pass through this mask freely. The same applies to this methanethiol and to CO2. But these masks, they slow down the airflow, literally the flow of air in and out of your lungs, and accordingly they might be somewhat problematic for people who are either exercising strenuously and wearing a mask, or people who have COPD, asthma, people who have cardiovascular problems and multiple ailments. So I'm not 100% for like mandatory masking. I believe that universal masking does have merit, and we should all try to wear this mask for our own protection and protection of others, but there are quite a few things that have to be investigated and researched further. And speaking of airflow, there is another thing I would like to talk to you about. I've seen this video and a couple of pictures of a guy who uses some sort of a vape, and this vape has visible vapor. So what he does is he inhales using the vape, he puts on the mask, and he exhales while wearing a mask. And you can clearly see the visible vape coming out of all the sides of the mask. It goes up, goes down, goes to the sides, and it's a good illustration of masks not being perfect. And I must say that this video is a little bit concerning because indeed it shows that how inefficient the masks are. Couple of things I would like to say in defense of masks in this situation is that I would like researchers to actually check a number of things, like using some sort of controlled experiments to see what happens to all these particles, what portion of the particles are being kind of stopped by the central part of the mask, and then we'll get a good results. Speaking of research, there were a number of research studies that involved people wearing masks and exhaling something that was either visible or detectable using certain techniques, and they have shown that still the transmission of this particle to other people in certain areas was significantly reduced while wearing a mask. But again, I believe that this simple experiment that this guy did, I wish I could replicate it, but I cannot because it would involve me vaping effectively, and I'm a practicing physician and I've got at least part of my practice is revolving around addiction, so I would prefer not to ever be filmed doing any kind of vaping technique. But coming back to that guy, I think he did a great job in illustrating at least one potential problem with the mask, which is they are not protecting the flanks and the viral droplets might go up and down, and it is a problem that has to be investigated, and if we want this mask to be more effective, we have to decide to which extent this kind of airflow effect affects the mask's efficiency and how we can counteract it. Again, I would like to point out that there is research that shows that wearing a mask reduces viral transmission significantly, no matter how many flaws or shortcomings these masks have. Okay, and the last item on my list is CO2, and when I was approaching the CO2, I approached it in the same way I would approach oxygen, right? Small molecule, supposed to pass through the mask easily, and I wouldn't even think that the masks are able of creating some sort of a pouch filled of CO2. But I've seen a video where I guess a school teacher or college teacher, he took some sort of CO2 monitor and put it underneath the mask, and he showed that if you do this, there is a build-up of CO2 inside of the mask. That creates obviously the potential for inhaling this CO2 and hypercapnia, which is increased CO2 concentration in our bloodstream, and all the negative effects like headaches, fatigue, and so on. One thing that was missing in his video, I actually really wanted to see it, was what happens if you just put this sensor next to your mouth. Because we do exhale CO2, and I wonder if even without wearing a mask, the CO2 reading would be pretty high. So I couldn't help it. I got myself this device just to test this question. I cannot say that I had a hypothesis. So let's do it now. So I turned my device on, and I guess I have to produce some verbiage here because it usually takes approximately 30 seconds to start giving you the right readings. The device measures CO2 in particles per million, and the acceptable levels are below 600 particles for schools, places where there are vulnerable people, and below 1000 particles in environments that are kind of less sensitive. Okay, so our goal is to have the CO2 concentration of below 1000 or preferably below 600. First of all, I see that my room is not particularly good. I hope you can see it. The reading is around 800 particles per million. Just to describe the room so you could understand the environment I'm in, it's actually a pretty big room, but I had closed all the windows and doors and I turned off the air conditioning because all these things, they create noise. So as a side effect of this experiment, it turns out that I'm creating not so healthy environment for myself when I'm making these videos. Anyhow, the reading is 800, 802, 803. let's try putting this device next to my mouth. So I'll be talking for, I don't know, 30 seconds, and we will see if my direct breathing out on the sensor will create some sort of a problem in terms of accumulation of CO2. So right now, I guess my airflow goes directly out of my mouth, passes the sensor. Sorry for any sound distortions because of that, and I will turn it to you so you could see it. The irony is that I cannot see it myself, but if the reading goes significantly higher than 800, which would be pretty much, if you add 25% CO2 to this, it will be 1000, and this device will start beeping, indicating that I'm in a dangerous situation. Ironically, as soon as I said device is gonna start beeping, it started beeping. So I will talk for next 5-10 seconds just to make sure that, you know, we'll have given exactly 30 seconds for this device to start reading the CO2 levels, which are like typical or common around my mouth area. You can see that we are in the area of 5000. That was pretty much close to what this gentleman has recorded when he was doing the CO testing with the mask. The next thing we have to do is we have to put on mask and to see whether wearing a mask makes things worse. So now I'm wearing a mask. So allegedly I'm creating a pouch of air which is like poorly ventilated, and this device is measuring the CO2 levels underneath the mask. I'm not good in small talk, but apparently I have to say something while doing this. I hope you can see the results. I cannot actually see them myself because I'm talking to you. So I want to give this device at least 30 seconds to see the true levels of CO2 that are formed in this pouch. And I'm trying to make sure that I've got the perfect seal here. So now you can see the results. Let's take a look. It's 4300. So I'm giving this device at least 30 seconds to make sure that I'm getting the true level of CO2 underneath the mask. And what I want to see is whether the level of CO2 is much higher than the level of CO2 measured just next to my mouth without the mask. So I'm going to take it out and I'm going to check it, and the score is 6000 at this particular point. So I'm going to turn it off and put it aside. I can take off my mask. So what we have just observed. So first of all, what we have seen was that the CO2 level in the room was 800 particles per million, which is an okay result. It's not optimal, it should be lower than 600. When I tested it in the open air, it was around 400 or 500 particles per million. In my room, it is 800 particles. Not optimal, but still not highly elevated. The device was not beeping. When I put this device underneath my mask, it has shown that the level went up to somewhere between 45 and 6500 particles per million, which was, I cannot say statistically, but in terms of effect size, not much worse than me just putting this device next to my mouth, where I exhale my CO2. So the end result of this experiment is that yes, there is an elevated level of CO2 next to a person's mouth, but it's not significantly higher if you're wearing a mask in comparison to you not wearing a mask. So in conclusion, I can say that the masks do not raise the CO2 levels significantly. Still, I would like to make a couple of medical or physiological additions to that experiment. First of all, it was n=1 experiment. I just experimented on myself. Second thing that I would like to say is, you know, the CO2 level here underneath the mask or next to my mouth is obviously important, but what is important is the CO2 concentration in our bloodstream, and unfortunately I have no way of testing that. I would love to do so, and I know that a lot of my colleagues and a lot of my patients are complaining that when they are wearing masks they do have headaches, they do feel tired. So there might be something about the CO2 saturation or CO2 concentration in the inhaled air. It has to be tested properly. Finally, obviously, I did some research and I found a video of some doctor who had, I think as a nurse, standing next to the some sophisticated device, and he said that they somehow tested the CO2 levels, but it was a very short test. I'm not sure what exactly was the procedure, what were exact outcomes. And one important thing I would like to say is that when you just start wearing a mask, and if it leads to increased intake of CO2, our body has a fantastic way of taking CO2 molecule. If there is too much of it, it merges it with a molecule of water using the enzyme called carbonic anhydrase, and it creates carbonic acid. This reaction, it allows our body to maintain lower levels of CO2 at the expense of pH. So my main point, actually, for the last three statements that I was kind of debating about, is that it would be amazing if we could have an experiment when we take like 20, 30, 50 volunteers and we do a full physiological experiment. We make them wear a mask and we test their oxygen saturation, their oxygen associated with hemoglobin levels, their CO2 levels, their airflow, multiple parameters. And based on these multiple parameters in a representative sample of volunteers, we could definitely say whether masks affect airflow to an extent when it is like hazardous to our health. Having said that, I think it's time to wrap up this video, otherwise it will last forever. I think I've done a pretty decent job today in terms of talking about 7 really pervasive ideas around mask wearing and coronavirus or airflow, oxygen, carbon dioxide, fences, farts, and so on. So I will keep doing my research. Please, if you agree with something or disagree with something in this video, leave a comment, ask a question. As you can see, I'm always happy to test things out. I have an open mind in general, and if somebody says that I'm wrong about something, I will do my best to understand their point of view and to not to debate with them, but to see where my shortcomings are and if I can address these criticisms in a constructive way. Also, check out my website, drsamshealth.com. I've got everything I talk about in my videos there in textual format, in the form of blogs. Plus, there are some other informational items and references to the articles I'm quoting in my videos. So, thank you for watching. Stay strong. All the best to you, and I'll see you in my next video.